Good afternoon. Welcome to Commodity Ag, the Changing Climate and Your Bottom Line. Thank you for joining us for the fourth in a series of agriculture-focused panel discussions. This is our first one that is focused on commodity ag. We especially want to welcome the commodity growers in the audience. For those of you who are not familiar with Business Climate Leaders, BCL, the mission is to engage businesses in seeking solutions to changing climate and its effects. My name is Don Shireen. I farm dry land in the Blue Mountains of southeastern Washington state. We produce wheat. We export nearly 90% of it. So last year was tough. We got half the rain we expected. Temperatures got into 115 degrees for a week or so. It all hit us. Wheat production in the state of Washington dropped to about half. On my farm, though, we dropped only maybe 10%. And the puzzle is, I don't know why. I don't know why we dodged the bullet. I do not know. And in those couple of sentences, we summarize this meeting's theme: changing climate and your bottom line. In the Pacific Northwest, we had imagined that our weather would move around a favorable mean. Some years a bit dry, other years a little bit, wet, more generous. Temperatures would be, cool in the winter, but not cold, warm in the summer, but not hot, or at least not too hot. We expect that our weather will stay between the lines, allowing us to farm. We also had imagined that if the volatile weather elsewhere in this nation is real climate change, then just maybe our little corner of the Pacific Northwest might be a winner. Maybe we would end up with more rain, longer growing seasons. Maybe our region might survive when others might be devastated by drought, by floods, by derechos, by brutal summers, late freeze-outs, and all the rest. This afternoon, Dr. Carolyn Olson, who grew up on a dairy in upstate New York, will start us off with a review of the last National Climate Assessment. We will take up my hopeful but naive notion that there might be winners in this climate game. And if we can do anything on our own operations to buck these climate effects, Keith Halberson will report on his own farm in South Dakota and his farming practices to buffer the changes that otherwise are tough to manage. Keith is hedging with agronomy. Don Moody from finance hedges with insurance. Don will review trends of actual crop insurance claim rates and talk to us about risk, retaining risk versus transferring risk, and how and why. And next, we will talk about the unspeakable. What do we do when our farms fail? Jeff Ditzenberger from Wisconsin will take us through what most of us know in the back of our heads, but do not talk about, and that is the human costs of financial failure. Hallie Schaffner from Arkansas will bring us back up. She'll talk to us farmer to farmer about how to use NRCS to access on-the-ground research that's specific to our locality. Her message is that resilience means being prepared, and research specific to your seasons and soils, water and crops is key to being prepared. And then we'll do Q&A. Our speakers have condensed their work to about 10 to 15 minutes each, so at the end, we will have time for you. And before we start, during the presentations and the conversations, please put your questions for the speakers in the chat. They will curate that for us, and at the end, we'll pick those up. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Carolyn Olson. Carolyn has a career-long list of achievements with the USDA. She is currently Scientist Emerita with the U.S. Geological Survey. She builds this afternoon on her work on the fourth National Climate Assessment, where she was coordinating lead of the Agriculture and Rural Communities chapter. Appropriately, her talk is titled National Climate Assessment 4 and Beyond. Carolyn, please.
Thanks, Don. I will just talk a little bit about assessments in general, including the fourth National Climate Assessment, and then I'll move on to some useful sites that some of you may not be aware of, or if you are, there may be some new things you haven't heard about yet. So if I could have the next slide. What are these assessments and why do we have them? In 1990, there was a law that was passed, and a couple of the sections that apply to the assessments are the two bullets here, two larger bullets. The formalized establishment of the U.S. Global Change Research Program that oversees the assessments and also works with researchers that work in climate change. And Section 106, where the scientific assessment is spelled out. These occur not less than every 4 years, and this is language directly from the law and has to be submitted to the President of the United States and Congress. So that means that these documents have to follow a very specific set of rules. The three mandates for any assessment are underlined, and those are integrating, evaluating, and interpreting the findings of the USGCRP. So what that means is a summary of the 4 years of research that has happened since the previous, or roughly 4 years, since the previous assessment. Analyzing the effects of global change on the natural environment, and that's where agriculture falls. And then the third item is to analyze current trends in climate change and then project major trends out 25 to 100 years. So these are in the law and we can't change those. The next slide somewhere is just the basics of the fourth National Climate Assessment. It came out in 2 volumes a year apart in November 2017 and November 2018. The first one is entirely on trends in climate change and projections for the future. That third mandate in the blue box on the bottom, the mandates are in the leftmost column. And the little check marks and boxes indicate whether volume 1 or volume 2 has most of the information that's associated with those congressional mandates. And the agriculture falls under effects, the second one down for the mandate. So if we could have the next slide. Now, volume 1, I'm just putting this up there because there were significant changes from the previous assessments. One was the first bullet, detection and attribution. Attribution had not been referred to much in previous assessments. And there are others listed. There are other bullets listed here, but the one that I underlined is downscaled information. And this is probably the most important for agriculture. In the past, there was only national results. And this time we have some regional results that have been included in the climate part of the report. This is a huge volume. So fortunately, the whole of that volume has been summarized in chapter 2 of the second volume. And so if you have time, I would read the summary rather than going through the entire first volume. So if I could have the next slide. These are the table of contents for volume 2. Agriculture falls under the national topics. So that particular chapter and all of the others in that section were at a national level. Some of the examples are more specific. But as you go to the regional chapters, that's where you have information that includes this downscaled approach for climate change. And the Midwest, Northern Great Plains, and Southern Great Plains have a key message section specific to agriculture. I think the Southwest may as well. The others may include agriculture with key messages in water or ecosystems. Okay, next. Chapter 10, which is the one I was mostly involved in, has 4 key messages. And they actually were touched on by Hallie's video ahead of our little beginning here. And the first key message in our chapter was that the frequency and duration of droughts are increasing. And of course, they impact agricultural productivity. And then the second one was degradation of both soil and water resources, meaning erosion of soil and water quality problems. And this is due to extreme precipitation events that have been increasing across the landscape. Third one is health challenges. And because we only were allowed, the national chapters could only have 6 published pages, we chose high temperature extremes to discuss. And they contribute to human health and heat stress in livestock. And again, that's another economic hit. And the fourth key message is about vulnerability and the adaptive capacity of rural communities. There's very limited capacity, and there are many reasons, but poverty is one of them, and the fact that fewer community resources exist in rural areas. So thank you. Next. Now, if you were counting, you'll notice that we're coming up close on 4 years more. And the NCA 5, that's all you have to put in your browser, and it will take you to discussions of what's happening on that front. But the two reasons that I've got this up here is that the public is going to have an opportunity here to contribute. The same thing happened in NCA 4. The second bullet down, the public engagement workshop for agriculture, is listed for January 28th in the afternoon Eastern time. If you use your browser and say NCA 5 engagement workshops, that will take you to the complete list of all the chapters, and you can choose the engagement workshops you would like to attend. All of them are in January and February, so that's the next 2 months. You have to register in order to be able to talk in these. The leadership for the Ag chapter is listed in the 4th bullet, and they're mostly ARS, Agricultural Research Service folks on this, and one person from NOAA. And the last item is the public comment period, where again, the public will be able to participate. This will be announced in the Federal Register, and the timing now is presumably fall 2022. This will happen after all the chapter drafts have been completed. So you would be commenting on the draft, and you need to register, and the information will provide what and how you do your work as far as the comments. For our chapter, we had between 2,000 and 3,000 comments. Every comment is read, and every comment has a written response. And these all become public record. So that's something to keep in mind if you decide to do your comments through this process. Next. Now, I've talked enough about the assessments, but you get the idea. They come out every so often, and you can participate at various levels. I thought I'd add a few regional centers if you haven't seen them. The USDA regional climate hubs are a very good site, and you don't have to do the link there. You just type in USDA climate hubs. There's 10 of them, I believe now, and the Midwest, I've put up there a couple of subheadings in there that I think are pretty useful. They have a climate resiliency toolkit, and that has case studies, tools, and actually how to plan an adaptation, a strategic plan yourself for your own area. That's been around that particular topic for a long time, so there were a lot of case studies listed on the site. Understanding La Nina conditions going into the winter. That's a new site, and that's, at least for the Midwest, is focused entirely on the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Upper Missouri River Basin. But it also has a very nice North American map on the first page with the jet stream and what's going to happen in La Nina. We had a La Nina winter last year, and already there's a La Nina winter coming up this year. So they're never exactly the same, but there's a lot of information in there on what to expect. I have not looked to see if some of the other climate hubs have done the same thing. And then the last one that I'm just putting in as an example is the Southwest Regional Climate Hub. They have a new drought dashboard, and that addresses some of the conditions, some of the ranchers' questions, particularly first ones I think are on forage, but that's fairly new for the Southwest. And then there are a couple of other sites. I think you've probably seen these. USDA NRCS has a National Water Climate Center that's been in existence for a long time. SCAN is the soil moisture network that is fairly well dispersed in the US. There's 200 and some sites. And then SNOWTEL for the Western US has snow information, and that's been in effect since the 30s. USDA NAS has a very nice section on charts and graphs. And so if we look at the next slide, this is an example. This is 2021 all wheat that's been planted throughout the country. And this particular one is about acres and percent change from the previous year. So you can go in and look and see what's happened this year versus last year. The next slide, please. This is another NAS site from charts and graphs. And this is crop progress. You can choose the crop, the commodity crop, and the state, and then you will get something like this. And so the top is the condition for 5 years. You can compare this year with the others. And then the other one is primarily condition, which is finished now during the whole of the summer. And then the bottom one gives you 4 or 5 years worth of how the time from planting to harvesting has changed. And there are several crops, not just the largest ones. The thing is in alphabetical order, and barley is the first one. So we have crops that don't necessarily have a lot of acreage in the whole of the US. Next slide. I work mostly in drought. So these are some of the drought sites that I think are most important. The Drought Monitor, that comes out every Thursday, it's updated. And the authors are listed on the site, and they consist of people from the meteorologists from USDA, NOAA, state climatologists, and UNL, which is the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And they alternate about a month a piece for each of the authors. NIDIS is the National Integrated Drought Information System found on drought.gov, and that's all you have to type in, drought.gov. It's a very large site, has a lot of information, and there's an agriculture tab. I just got an email this week about a new drought alert that you can sign up for with your emails. It's supposed to do 2 things, show you current drought conditions and drought outlook for 1 month and 3 months out. This is more specific because you use zip codes, you can use lat long, and I think you might be able to use a street address, although I'm not really sure about that. Again, I haven't tried this out yet, so I don't know, but it's supposed to be very specific to your farm or operation. Yeah, so if we go on to the next slide. This is an example of one of the maps that's available on drought.gov. And it takes the sites, the material from NAS, and this happens to be cotton, where the major and minor cotton crops are grown, and overlays the drought map. And this was done for November 30th. And of course, it will change from week to week. And this says too that about 51% of the cotton production is in an area that has been experiencing drought. So this gives you a little bit of information from a variety of different sources. And you can go back to NAS and look at the same map without the drought. Next, please. CoOp Ross is another type of, it's a grassroots volunteer organization. It's run by NOAA. You receive training. You can sign up to be a person who collects rain, hail, and snow. In other words, precipitation. And then the map is from all over the country. And then the map is produced and uploaded. This is from November 22nd and shows 24 hours worth of precipitation. I'm sure they'd love to have more people from the Western states involved, because all the little circles are just the locations that they have at the moment. Next, please. The other sites I think that are fairly important are state climatologists, their mesonet networks. Oklahoma has one of the longest standing, and so I think it's very nice. It has a mobile app, and in addition to weather parameters, the agricultural tab on the map or on the website or on the mobile site include things like comfort for cattle, drift risk, degree day heat, dispersion, and many other agricultural related parameters. So that's, and from state to state, it varies on how much of this kind of information is available. But I'd look at the Oklahoma site just to see. Blue Water Outlook is a national level weather, water, and climate site. And you sign up for that. Just type in Blue Water Outlook. Southeast Florida Regional Compact, I put this in there because their focus is on adaptation, but they have the types of problems or issues, challenges that many of the other sites that we're looking at do not. And that's because they have the pressures associated with dense populations, stormwater, surges, hurricanes, and all of that has to be addressed in order to be able to try to work at their problems. They also have agricultural issues. The Southeast Regional Climate Center, CIRC, just look up CIRC, and that will give you another site very similar to what you find at some of the USDA climate hubs. They are focused on 5 or 6 states in the southeastern US, so it's a similar overlap. They have an agroclimate section, and they work a lot on specialty crops, strawberries, blueberries, peanuts, you name it, citrus, for that southeastern part of the US. They look at diseases, they look at how it's related to climate and weather, frost-free days, and how to deal with those sorts of things. So that's a very nice site to look at. And I think I have just one more slide. Yeah, this is slightly different. This is a Comet Farm tool for estimating carbon and greenhouse gases. And the reason I put this in here is because there's a lot of discussion about net zero emissions. And in fact, I think I heard that President Biden signed an executive order today about net zero emissions in 2050. So anyway, this one has the user provide information for their management practices. And it's very nice because it pulls in all the other databases that are necessary: soil survey, soil conditioning, climate, precipitation, temperature, for an area that you have, a polygon area that you have determined. It can be site-specific, or it can be an area of interest. And what comes out are where the greenhouse gases are contributing in your farm operation. And the last 3 items down there, cropland, livestock, and on-farm energy, are where the management practices are addressed in this tool. So anyway, last slide, just thank you. Appreciate your time.
Carolyn, thank you. Thank you so much. We will come back to some of the other items that you want to talk about in the conversation at the end. So stay tuned. Keith Halberson. Keith Halberson's family began farming in South Dakota about 6 generations ago. He was on the National Corn Growers Association board for about 10 years. He chaired the NCGA Climate Task Force, and he spoke for the NCGA at COP 21 in Paris. His title is Agronomy and Farm Management in a Changing Climate. Keith, please.
Thanks, Don. Good afternoon, everyone. And so as he indicated, I was going to talk a little bit about agronomy and farm management, and kind of go through some things that we've been witnessing on our farm, what it's like farming in South Dakota, and some of the best management practices and technology use that we've implemented that are kind of helping us deal with some of this. And so, yeah, thank you. And so there's a little icon on where our farm's located, so everybody has a visual reference. As Don mentioned, I'm 6th generation of my family, and so the Halbersons have been farming in South Dakota since before South Dakota was South Dakota. And so we've witnessed a variation of things, probably from plowing the prairies to the Dust Bowl and Dirty 30s, and some of the conservation practices implemented as of late. And so Dr. Olson talked about some of the things in the National Climate Assessment, rainfall intensities and variations and variabilities. And a lot of those things are what we're witnessing here in South Dakota. Frost dates are becoming more variable. It makes it a challenge, but the rainfall intensity and variability is some of the things that we've been dealing with over the last 4 years. As you can see in the chart in the upper right-hand corner, those are measured in inches of annual precipitation. And in 2018, we had just a couple inches over what our normal annual precipitation is. But then it got wet late in the fall, and so it kind of skewed the annual precipitation because it was all accumulated towards the end of the year. And then it really hit us hard in 2019, where we had significant early season rainfall and low, relatively low temperatures. And so it made it tough to get into the field and get crops planted, which is essential for, remaining profitable and having a productive year. And so some of the soil health practices that we've implemented over time, I think were beneficial, and it allowed us to get in and get planted where the vast majority of our region was unable to even put in a crop. You kind of flip the script on that when we talk about variability and we start rolling into 2020 and 2021, where we went from having 42 inches of annual precipitation in 2019 to less than half of that in each 2020 and 2021. And a seed agronomist had told me this fall that the time period, the 12 months between July of 2020 and the July of 2021 were actually drier than any 12 months recorded during the Dust Bowl. And so we were still able to produce a crop, albeit it wasn't as the crop that we wanted, but it's just kind of a testament to some of the practices and the technology that we have at our disposal to try and combat some of the challenges that we're faced. And so next slide, please. And so getting into some of the best management practices, I wanted to put this image up here. I saw that this summer when we were doing some traveling, and it's a Kenyan proverb saying, treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents, but loaned to you by your children. And so something that really hit home and meant a lot to me, because I do think that, this is all about passing on both the earth and the soil in better condition than we had it presented to us. And so some of the best management practices that we've worked on our farm over time to try and implement this and to live up to this standard is first and foremost, growing high carbon crops. And front and center for that in our region is corn production. As a C4 grass, it's really efficient about converting sunlight into biomass. So when you combine that with reductions in tillage, it allows us to maintain ground cover and actually work on increasing organic matter by the return of that biomass to the soil, and reducing tillage so you don't expose some of that biomass, as much of the biomass, to the open air. More of that carbon remains in stable form and returns to the soil, actually sequestering carbon. So some of this rolls into water management. We have both irrigation on a small area of our farm, and we have tile drainage. And so the soil kind of works like a sponge, and the high carbon crops and the increase in organic matter levels that we see from that make the sponge bigger. So during dry periods, it has more room, or more water holding capacity that we can provide for the crop. And then during wet periods, it has more room just to soak up extra moisture. And so we saw that both in 2019, and then the last couple of years, where it allowed us to get into the field to perform field operations. Agronomically, with the variability of the frost dates, hybrid and variety selection become more important. Trying to pick varieties and hybrids of our production crops that use the full season is pretty critical. We've made attempts at growing cover crops in this region, but it's just hasn't worked out very well due to the typically late season dryness, not having enough moisture to establish cover crops. But one of the other reasons is we typically use our full growing season, frost to frost or close to that, with our commodity crops. One of the other things that we've been doing for close to 40 years is 4R nutrient management, and so that's putting on the right product at the right rate at the right time, and in putting it in the right place. And so those things all give less exposure to environmental loss due to that variability in moisture. intense rainfall events. According to the National Climate Assessment, our region has definitely increased the frequency of 4+ inch rains. And so some of these things, maintaining the ground cover, really try and helps mitigate some of those challenges that we would see with that. And so a lot of this gets rolled back into organic matter and the value that brings, working as a sponge, protecting the soil, and ultimately making us more resilient and being more productive. And so some of these practices that we've had in place, we've done some measurements and actually are approaching organic matter levels that were here when the prairies were in our tall grass prairies were in our region. Next slide, please. So for my final slide, talking a little bit about technology, I had a picture of the 7th generation that's working away on our farm, but wanted to put a quote up from my dad because I heard it numerous times as I was growing up and as we've worked together on the farm. He said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And with the technology that we have at our fingertips, every field pass that we make, we're measuring and being real accurate with our applications. And so all of that can be combined to improve our management and make better decisions through data analytics. The precision technology that we have gives us ultra precise ways to both apply nutrients and seeds and herbicides, as well as record things and make accurate decisions. And so really, we end up farming in windows. And as we see the intensity and the variability change, this technology allows us to get in and farm in a window of time. And those windows seem to be getting narrower the further into my career that I get because of that variability in rain and heat and frost dates. And so being able to know when we need to be getting into the field, and if we see a window of opportunity to get in and perform a field operation, we have to use everything that we can to try and get in and get the field operations done. And so trying to size equipment accordingly and have manpower or technology power there in order to do that has been ever more important. And so I kind of wanted to sum up and say thank you for allowing me to be here, but wanted to say that in my mind, kind of the bottom line is good agronomy has always been important, but it's ever more important as we deal with some of these changing climate events and with the changing climate. And so thank you and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you much. And likewise, we'll get to the questions and carry on the conversation. Don Moody of Farmers Business Network is our third speaker. With FBN, Don specializes in grower risk management. For most of us, that means crop insurance. While he's a specialist in commercial property and casualty, he paid his farmer dues early in his career as a crop adjuster, not a duster, but adjuster. He got his boots in the field. His title is Risk Management, Changing Climates, and Your Crop Insurance. Don, please.
All right, thank you, sir. So today we're going to cover a little bit how risk is managed, why modern crop insurance, how it came into being, how the RMA and their MPCA policies coverage kept in place with, and actually bear with me a second, my screen. There we go. Policies and coverages have kept pace with weather patterns, or have they not? Farming practices, loss ratios actually are static, believe it or not. Building your risk management plan and kind of some thoughts to put in that quickly, coupling RMA products with private products, some risk management optimization tools that are out there. And I want everybody to remember options. There are always options. With that, next slide, please. So what is risk? Risk is a situation involving exposure to danger, exposure to uncertain factors such as weather, disease, pests, and other factors affecting the quantity and quality of commodities produced. And what do you do with it? Retained risk versus transferring the risk. One of the reasons I'm actually very excited to be on this panel is the fact that good agronomy practices coupled with a proper risk management plan are almost always best for the producers. Years ago, we had a quarter section of farm ground that was very prone to wind damage. And being good farmers, we planted everything true north and south. And we were looking one day at damage. And my dad went, why on earth are we not rotating our rows about 30 degrees? We did that and significantly reduced our wind damage. Just a simple little farming practice. Next slide, please. So this is a slide of 2021 year to date. There's still a few crops that aren't fully accounted for as far as where they're going to end up with indemnities of how it hit. And none of us are surprised what happened in the north. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota were decimated, as were parts of New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, parts of the Delta were not spared. In Iowa, we were blessed with substantial subsoil moisture. We had no water livestock in the pastures by and large, but we did have subsoil moisture. So next slide, please. And this would be 2017. And again, you'll see these indemnity maps absolutely mirror what is going on with our climate changes and how they impact us. And with that, I need a big favor going clear back to that very first slide, please. I should have been more organized. Sorry about that. So loss ratios actually, believe it or not, are fairly static. I didn't share this with the group because it's just simply too busy, but I pulled some data from 89 to 98. And then again, 19 into 2021, or what is at least reconciled for 21. The loss ratio in 89 was 1.49. And anytime in insurance, you get a loss ratio above $1, that means you're going backwards. Those loss ratios stayed fairly high through 93. 93, I think, was a flood for a significant amount of areas, including where I farmed in north central Nebraska at the time. We thought it was impossible to have excess moisture. 94, yeah, the loss ratio dropped to 0.63. We flash forward to 19, the loss ratio of 1. 2020 was a 0.56. I ended up at actually a 0.86 when everything was accounted for. And right now, 2021, actually, believe it or not, is looking somewhere where it's going to be around a 0.43, which again is very acceptable. And why I wanted to bring that up is the loss ratios obviously tie right into what's going on. And I wanted to speak just real briefly on why modern crop insurance. So crop insurance has been around forever in an APH basis, or protecting what you actually produce. Somewhere in the 90s, there was a group of senators, I believe they called themselves the Prairie Populists, that decided that disaster was simply too expensive. Disaster payments were prone to fraud, waste, and abuse. They weren't easily forecast, and you didn't have to pay to play. And what I mean by that is you could participate in best farming practices. You could participate with the old soil conservation service programs, have a disaster come along, and someone who had opted not to participate in best practices was eligible for the same disaster payments. So they developed modern crop insurance, which is based around a revenue product. Because again, our goal and our purpose on my side of the house is to protect your bottom line, to make you whole, to allow you to farm that other year when Mother Nature deals a blow, whether it's drought, wind, which hit our area last year, excess moisture. And interestingly, as I looked through losses, the most common losses across the US, I pulled some out of South Dakota to cover Keith. I pulled some out of the Delta to cover Halley. I covered some out of Washington, or pulled the data. And actually excess moisture was very common. Where I grew up, it was hail. Wind is common too, but those are things that you should cover. And when you develop a plan, work with a professional who's used to your agronomic practices, understands your agronomic practices, understands what you're trying to do to minimize your own risk by what you're doing in your own operation, and then couple that with available products. When I was a crop adjuster, I was in areas where farmers had extensive wind coverage and green snap coverage, and they quite honestly didn't need it. And that's money wasted. And perhaps that money should have been shuffled, or not shuffled, but moved to other areas that would cover more risk. Crop insurance is expensive in the plain states. It's fairly affordable in Dakota, most of Nebraska, the I states. So again, you have to also compare it with your bottom line. And that's something that we hammer home with a lot of folks, is develop a good risk management plan, make sure it applies to your operation, but have a budget in mind when you're doing all that. You know what your costs are, what it's going to cost you to protect that side of your risk. Try to find a insurance specialist that has optimization tools. And what I mean by that is someone that can actually plug in different options for coverages, different private products coupled with the various federal products. Again, it shows you how those would have performed in the past. So it gives you a look back. Couple that with your best analyzation of future forward products. And there are a lot more weather forecast models that are coming to the forefront to let us go further months out. And then again, keep your budget in mind. And with that, my next and last favor is to zip, I think, to slide number 4 or 5, pretty please. Man, I owe the tech people a huge favor. So different RMA coverages. I won't go into them. They're available. Select varieties. It used to blow my mind. And actually, it kind of helped me a wee bit when I was an adjuster. Sometimes I could ask the variety of corn that was planted and how many acres it was planted on. And it made my job as a crop adjuster significantly easier on green snap, because some hybrids are simply more prone to it. And if you're in an area of high wind, why on earth would you plant it? And that's part of that self-retention of rate, or risk rather. My very last slide, I believe, is coming up. You know, again, the big idea, think through your management plan, use your farming practices, do everything you can to minimize risk yourself. And then what you have at risk, work with a professional to develop a risk management plan, again, that fits your risk tolerance personally, your budget, and addresses everything that there could be to lose. Because again, the goal of crop insurance in today's world is to keep you whole and allow you to farm another year. And with that, I thank you.
Don, thank you very much. I'm struck by the stable loss ratios between 20 and 21, and especially 21. Interesting. Good. Well, what if you're hit with weather that you can't handle agronomically, and Don's crop insurance doesn't quite reach the corners? Well, I said in the introduction that we will talk about the unspeakable. What do we do when our farms fail? What are the human costs? Well, no one's better to talk us through these issues than Jeff Ditzenberger. He's a Wisconsin farmer, an entrepreneur, and a mental health advocate. Jeff, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Physically, mentally, I'm not really sure.
All right. All right. Well, Jeff, we have a saying that the successful farmer, the definition of a successful farmer, is the only child of rich parents who died young. The rest of us aren't so lucky. We have too many siblings, maybe. We're one crop failure away from being told that the bank is going to leave us high and dry and we're finished up. So what do you do with that? And you've been in agriculture all your life. How do you take on the farmers' mental health issues? What do you got?
Well, first of all, around here, we say that the only surefire way to make a small fortune farming is to start out with a really big one. That's kind of been our montage around here for many, many years. And a little bit of background about myself real quick. So I'm a certified mental health life coach. I'm not a therapist. I am not a counselor. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I do have a lot of lived in experience with my own suicide attempt in 1992 at the age of 22. But basically, one of the things that we have been talking about today is climate change and the things that we can control inside of our farming operations. And I'll tell you the biggest thing, and I've told this back when I was, still selling machinery. I sold machinery for 22 years and still ran a dairy farm and crop farmed, is that the only thing we can truly control in this environment is our attitude. And, that's one of those things that, we forget about. And agriculture, you think about rural America. One of the challenges with rural America is that we don't have the mental health resources that a lot of places do, the bigger cities and that kind of stuff. Let's be honest, we're a proud folk. Farmers don't talk about their feelings in any way, shape, or form. And it's interesting when I do these kind of speeches live, when I do the longer ones, and I have a room full of people, and I can have like 20 ladies, and I can have 200 guys, and I can say the word feelings, and the ladies will say it, and you can hear it across the United States, and the guys are like, feelings, and so these are things we don't talk about. These are, in our society has made it to the point where, it's not okay to talk about feelings. It's not okay to talk about the things that are bothering us. In the struggle that we have as well within the agricultural community is that we have people that are not as, don't do everything the same, but yet are having the same challenges. When we're having weather challenges, we can't do anything about those weather challenges. However, we might be able to hedge a crop a little bit, or we might get into some kind of a specialty crop that can make us some money, or we can maybe decide to cut some costs someplace, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that the other challenge with that is that, agriculturists and farmers speak a special language. It's kind of like myself as a veteran, my veteran friends, we speak a special language. The outsiders don't understand that language. And it's interesting what's happened now in the last couple of years when we had the farm crisis of 2018 on forward, weather challenges in 18 and forward, and of course they go back farther than that, but I'm trying to put it into more current perspective. I've actually had therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists and farm bankruptcy lawyers reaching out to me to speak to their groups, so that they can be able to relate to the farmers that are out there struggling. And one of the biggest things that we can do is, obviously, we can be good neighbors. I can remember back when I was a young lad. Actually, I've only been farming for 3 years and I'm 25. But anyways, when I was a young lad, we had my mom. I got a broken leg. I was in 5th grade. It was a summer between 5th and 6th grade. I got a broken leg. My mom was pregnant with my brother that I never asked for. And I was 10 years old, and my dad got sick. He was out getting ready to milk cows, and he got a whiff of the chemicals in the milk house, and they had been mixed together by accident. And so grandma was there. She ran him to the hospital where the farm work still had to be done. And all these neighbors showed up from out of the blue and got all of our chores done and got and I feel like we've gotten away from that. I feel like we're in such a bubble now that we don't check on our neighbors. We don't, we have these wonderful technological devices that we text with people anymore. I was at a speaking event not too long ago, and I said, you can actually push numbers on there and talk to people. Like, they have voices and everything, so let's move into, now we get into 2020. And what was the buzzword of 2020? COVID. And most farmers are like, hey, I can handle this. We've been social distancing animals for years. I'm self-sufficient. I got plenty of beef. I got vegetables. I've got crops here. I don't need to go to town and that kind of stuff. And that was fine. But at the same time, people's mental health has really taken a huge beating over COVID. We're social media savvy. Let's go back to 2010 when we had H1N1. And 20% of America, or 20% of the world, had social media. Now we're in this day and age in 2020, 2021, where 95% of people have social media. And all of a sudden, the guy that barely passed high school is suddenly a virologist and is telling everybody how they should live their lives. And we've got all of this angst that's coming in. So what do we do to control some of this? Well, the first thing that I do, one of the things that I do is that I shut my phone off for at least an hour a day, and not shut it off completely, but walk away from it. And it's amazing what happens when you get away for just even an hour. And that's because of the number of people that reach out to me in potential crisis situations. I can't walk away for a long period of time, but we have to do that. one of the other things that we can do is we can actually call up a neighbor or call up a good friend and ask them how things are going, you know, and if they tell you that, you know, I'm not really feeling the best today, ask them why. Ask them what you can do to help them with this, with this angst that they're going through. And the other thing that we need to do is if we are having our own bad days, we need to reach out to people and we need to have that validation that our bad day is okay, that it's just a bad day, it's not a bad life. And people will kind of chuckle when I say things like that because you're like, well, that's just too cliche and easy. Yeah, because it is. This is not crop insurance. This is not complicated. This is just, no offense to the crop insurance guy. This is simple, everyday rural life, talking to people and bringing them out of that angst that they have, because all of us have gone through some kind of a traumatic experience at some point in time. You know, anxiety has been huge. We've come into now with the pandemic, what is being the buzzword in the mental health world right now is called pandemic exhaustion, which basically everybody is sick of everything related to the pandemic. You can't get away from it. I actually had an appointment up at the VA today to get my booster shot. And I found these Santa masks because you have to wear a mask up at the VA. There's no getting around it. And it was amazing the number of people who are like, that is the coolest mask ever. And the number of people that are like, wow, this, like, thanks for bringing some holiday cheer. You know, we've gotten very conditioned to do Zoom meetings. We've got very conditioned to, you know, talking via email. We've gotten very conditioned to doing all these things that don't give us the human interaction. When my most quiet, shy, introverted friends are to the point where they're like, dude, I want to go out and have a drink. That tells me something, you know, there and you know, kindness is a word that needs to spread faster than what the virus is. And I know that this sounds kind of cliche because it kind of is, but I want to give you a story, a real quick story about something that happened to me a few years ago that kind of changed a lot of things that I do. But we have a place in Wisconsin called Quick Trip. And Quick Trip is kind of like our grocery store, church, liquor store, gas station. Like if you can't find it at Quick Trip, you probably don't need it. I mean, I think some people even find their significant others there. But anyways, I was at Quick Trip, and you know how it is when you go into, like, especially for us in rural America, when we go into the gas station or the local grocery store or something, like, you know, hey, Don, how's it going? Hey, Carolyn, how's it going? Hey, Keith, how's it going? Complete strangers. Hey, how's it going? And everybody's like, okay, good. You know, oh, living the dream, so on and so forth. And I had this gentleman one day that said, why do you care? And I said, well, I asked you. And he goes, yeah, but do you really care? Or are you just asking me? And I'm like, no, I care. I kind of want to know about this. And he said, well, he says, actually, he says, I'm having a really crappy day. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he goes, well, he says, I think my cat's dying. And I said, you think your cat's dying? And he says, yeah. I said, well, why do you think that? And he's like, well, I feed her and I water her. And when she eats and drinks, she kind of makes this weird sound like, and, you know, kind of describe the symptoms. And I'm like, I honestly think your cat has a hairball. And he's like, what are you, a veterinarian? And I'm like, no, but I've had a lot of cats. So he's like, well, what do I do about this? And I said, well, it's pretty simple. You go to Walmart or Farm and Fleet or Farm and Barn or whatever your local place is, and get yourself some cat hairball remedy and you feed it to her. And I said, I tell you what, it'll be disgusting for a few days, but hopefully it'll clean things up and she'll feel better and everything will be fine. If it doesn't improve, then by all means take her to your local veterinarian. So we parted ways. 6 weeks go by. I'm back in Quick Trip. They have really good donuts. That's the main reason I go. But I was back in there, and just about the time I'm ready to pay for my stuff, this hand throws down his credit card next to me and says, I'm paying for this man's breakfast. And I turn around and here it's Cat Guy. And that's all I know him as, because I've never asked him his name. I do know his cat's name, but I don't know his name. Anyways, so he says, do you remember me? And I says, yes, you're the guy with the cat. And he goes, can we talk outside? And I'm like, man, he's bigger than I am. This is going to end well. We have cameras outside. So we go outside and he says, you were right. My cat had a hairball. And I said, dude, that's awesome. Like, this is great. You know, and keep in mind, this is a complete stranger. This isn't even somebody that I know. And he goes, no. He says, you don't understand. He says, there's more to this story. And I said, okay. He said, I just moved here from the opposite side of the nation. He said, I was on the West Coast. to a job that the day I walked into the front doors no longer existed for me. He goes, I had no job, no friends. I just moved here. The only thing I had in my little apartment was my cat. And he said, I told my very self that very morning when you asked me how I was doing, that if my cat died, I was going to die with my cat. These are the kind of impacts that we can have as everyday people. You know, farmers plant seeds. That's what we do for a living. If anybody has a huge amount of blind faith, it's us in the agricultural business. We plant seeds all the time. What we need to start doing is we need to start planting more seeds of hope. We need to reach out to our neighbors and tell them that we're going through the same struggles and we understand how it is. We need to take over some milk and cookies and have a conversation with them. We need to reach out on the phone to people, send a text message and tell people that they matter. It's so easy to change this climate of mental health. COVID has been around for barely 2 years, and we talk about it every minute of every single day for the last 2 years, like it's talking about anything. Yet mental health and mental health challenges have been around since the dawn of time, and it's still something that we don't talk about.
Jeff, thank you much. Thank you much. Hallie, this is going to be a tough act to follow. Hallie Shover is our next presenter. Hallie comes from the Mid-South on the Arkansas, Mississippi Delta. She heads up SFR Seed, which specializes in contract seed increase of soybeans and rice for an international market. Her operation takes seed stock from seeding through harvest, cleaning, packaging, and shipping out to customers around the world. Her message is resiliency, being prepared, and she talks to us about some of the tools and how to use them in getting started on your road to resilience. Hallie, please.
Thanks, Don. And thank you to all of the panelists today. I had the fortune of being on the planning committee for this, and it's been a real pleasure working behind the scenes, Don, with you and with all of the knowledgeable people. So a little about me, and I'm so sorry I have a bit of a cold, so I don't normally sound like this. I operate a 1,500-acre farm in Northeast Arkansas. We grow soybeans, corn, rice, and wheat. We are furrow irrigated and flood irrigated as well. It's a sandy silt loam soil, so a bit different from what Don does and what Keith does. My parents started farming when I was 3 months old, and I grew up on the very same land that I farm today. It's a farm that's been in my family for 6 generations. My parents are everything to me. They're on this webinar. Hi, Mom and Dad. They taught me everything I know. And as much as, I want to improve on the farm with new technologies, I recognize that that I stand on a very solid bedrock that's 3 decades of their hard work. So I'm here today to give a perspective of someone who's really just getting started with implementing some of the practices that Keith talked about. My experience in gathering information and planning strategies, the resources that I found helpful. And I want to echo what Keith and Don said about the changing weather patterns. We are experiencing those same patterns. In the last 5 crop seasons that we have had a yield or revenue reduction in each year due to extreme weather patterns. And I did my own analysis of those losses. We've lost about $133,000 over the last 5 years due to extreme weather. And it isn't that farmers haven't experienced bad weather years. That's always a threat. And one of the things we try to prepare for, it's the business model that we employ, is to be as profitable as possible in the good years and use those profits to offset losses in the bad years. And that works really well when there are more good years than bad. And it's very obvious from boots on the ground, and my parents can absolutely attest to this, that the number of bad years is increasing. So I'm a very structured person. I like to approach things systematically. I like to write things down. I'm very much my mother's daughter. And so I started with simply identifying the problem. I have increased losses due to extreme weather, and I'm curious about how conservation practices can be a solution. And so I set a goal, which is my next slide. Become more profitable by employing conservation practices that will increase yields and reduce inputs. And then it was a matter of sorting through the various sustainable farming practices that are gaining popularity. And that was overwhelming at first, but I found a lot of help and resources within the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the NRCS, or the USDA. I hope everyone is familiar with them. They are great. You may know of their funding programs, but more than that, they are a good online and in-person resource. And being the structured person that I am, one of the things that spoke to me about the NRCS is their technical support, their 9-step conservation planning process, which is on the next slide. I wanted to show it to you. This is the graphic that you can get off their website. I kind of shortened it a little bit, but, and I'm not going to go through each step. That's not really necessary, but I do want to highlight the important parts that I went through that I think other farmers can go through, and that you can work with your local conservationist on. So next slide. Yes, thank you. The first step of the process is to identify your problems and opportunities. And I spent a good portion of my time in grad school. I have a master's degree in public service, learning how to build strategic plans. And this is what's called a SWOT analysis. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but it's looking into your internal strengths and weaknesses and your external opportunities and threats, SWOT. And it's a good process because we need to understand what our resources are so that we can make decisions based on what we already have and what we know we need to build on. And I don't want to go through all these, but one of the most important things that we found was that we have lots of opportunities based on the fact that we are furrow and flood irrigated. We have bedded ground, sandy ground. We have access to chicken litter, which is definitely an opportunity. And then, of course, we identified the threat, which is cost. And one of the things that we've found, and I'll talk about this later, is that that's not as big of a threat as we thought it would be. So if you go to the next slide, Randy. Thank you. So we decided then to determine our objectives, which is the next step in the 9-step planning process. And so our first project, and we started this 2 years ago, is to reduce overall tillage by 39% in 3 years. And we decided, based on the way that we farm, which is on beds, furrow irrigated beds, we had an opportunity for permanent bedding, which is a minimal till farming practice. We can, basically in a normal year, we make as many as 5 passes over an acre to prep for planting. And with a permanent bedder, which is a $25,000 piece of equipment, we can just go 1 pass and we are prepped for planting. And over 3 years, that saves us 12 passes per acre. And one of the most important things that I did was I decided I'm going to have to know how much money I'm saving. So I did the calculations, I pulled our bills, and I said, okay, I'm going to save $12 an acre per pass, which means in 3 years, I'm going to save $72,000 labor, fuel, equipment wear and tear, and insurance. So really addressing that threat, which is, yes, it's an initial investment, but it's really got almost a 300% ROI. So our next project, which we are 1 year into, is a 2-year strategic application of chicken litter. And it's an initial investment of $40,000, which is actually pretty cheap considering there is a chicken house not 45 minutes from our farm. And this first year, we've estimated an average bump of 3 bushels per acre. We've also reduced our synthetic fertilizer. Based on what we've experienced this year, I've projected a $68,000 savings in 4 years. And the next slide. this is what we're doing this year. We're actually getting ready to do some precision ground grading. So we're going to zero grade, which is basically make everything level. This is 17 acres of premium rice ground. This is a test. It's going to cost us about $6,000. We have an electric well on this 17 acres, and we've estimated we will save 60 hours of water pump time, which is about $1,000 a year in just utilities. So that's a 6-year ROI. And next slide. We are also going to convert all of our diesel wells to electric. This I'm really excited about. It's an investment of about $7,000 to $9,000 a well, but based on the cost of diesel right now, we're going to save $80 an acre. So if we're irrigating an 80-acre field, which is about normal, we're saving $6,400 a year. So you're paying off that initial investment in less than 2 years. So, next slide, because we are doing a few other things we're working on, moisture meters, weather stations. We are going to look into grid sampling this year. In 2023, we'll be doing a 50-acre, 1-year single species test with the help of the NRCS on cover crops, which is an ideal thing for us to try on some of our sandier ground. And we are having initial discussions on solar panels. And what I really want to encourage farmers to do when they're setting these objectives is to get into the weeds and find out exactly how much you're going to be saving, because it can really make sort of this overwhelming decision of, oh my gosh, there's so many things that you can do out in the world. It'll really make these decisions a lot easier and make them less overwhelming. So next slide. As far as resources go, we obviously could not have done any of this by ourselves. Best resource is the NRCS. Their technical assistance is great. Our local conservationist came out, did a site visit, brought maps of all of our fields, had some great conversations with us. The local conservationist walked us through the funding programs, which is CSP and EQIP. That was really great. We have not yet applied for that funding. We will in the coming year. The NRCS also has partners in Arkansas, and there are partners all over the country. I think Iowa has like 20 plus RCCP partners, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Indiana has a ton of really great ones, things like the Soil Health Alliance, conservation authorities and districts. These are all really great resources. They have funding opportunities as well. In Arkansas, there's funding opportunities for rice farmers in terms of nutrient management and irrigation management. And then in terms of the NRCS website, man, you can really dig in and find some great stuff. So next slide. As far as other resources go, in terms of what we've done on our farm, it's really about picking up the phone. Whether you're talking to your local conservationist or you're talking to a neighbor who's done cover cropping or who's done zero grade, and just pick up the phone and ask questions. I'm sure that I've asked dumb questions in the last 2 years that I've been working on this. I have done a lot of Googling. There is a ton of stuff out there. The NRCS YouTube channel is a total rabbit hole when it comes to conservation practices. Farmers.gov is a great resource. Your local utility company actually may be a great resource for you if you're looking into alternative energy like solar, or if you have electric well, or you have diesel wells you'd like to convert. I really liked, Carolyn talked a lot about the USDA climate hubs. Those are also really great resources. So I think the moral of our story, at least, is that it's all about empowering yourself with knowledge, understanding what it is you have to offer, understanding what's out there, working with your local conservationist to really hone in on what's possible. And don't start big, start small. I mean, we started with just 500 acres of permanent bedding, and that wasn't difficult. And so anyway, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you so much to the panelists for including me. And thanks so much to BCL Business Climate Leaders.
Alec, thank you so much. It's been a delight discovering how different some of our situations are. I never knew what 0 grade was as I look out my window and I see these hillsides that, you know, drop off into canyons. So it's been a delight understanding the variety and the variation of conditions, crops, seasons, everything across the country. We're moving on to our Q&A now, and lots of good questions have come in. Let's start with Carolyn. Carolyn, let's go back to my optimistic notion that there might be some areas or cropping patterns or something that might be relatively resistant to what you project is going to happen in climate. Are there going to be some benign effects, or are we all looking at volatility, changes, frequency and duration of droughts, flooding, so forth, all increasing? So Carolyn, can you help us on that a bit?
I think the latter is probably going to be more common, and variability is probably the word of the day. And I'm hoping you can hear me because you can't see me for some reason, but that's okay. And a lot depends on, well, we've learned a lot over time that you can't ignore what's happening in the world of climate when you're working in agriculture. My dad, when he would call me on the phone, never would say, "Oh, how are you?" first. He would say, "What's your weather like?" So, yeah, it's very important to know not just the weather, which is your everyday precip, temp, and humidity, and so on, but it's important to be able to understand projections and look at what is available. And of course, it's all within the bounds of uncertainty, but there's all these sites out there now that have a lot of information on what to expect in a month, 2 months, 3 months. And I know for farming and for ranching, farming more, the 3 and 6 month out is really important. We've also learned that El Nino and La Nina, which are Pacific oscillations, the sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Pacific equatorial area, play a major role in what our winter weather is going to be like. And I know someone either put it in the chat or something, they asked a question, or maybe it was one of the panelists said something about they couldn't get in their fields in the spring when they wanted to. And that does happen. And even with La Nina, because you need to know what your initial soil moisture conditions are before the major effects of these large jet streams and atmospheric rivers are. Because in the spring, if you had a lot of soil moisture in your fields before the winter, and if you lived in the Northwest or north of, say, the Ohio River, and La Nina was expected for the winter, that's a wet, cold kind of situation. You're not going to be able to get in the fields on time. And so if you're paying attention to all this, you'll be able to readjust your thoughts on what to expect. Now, it may not be exactly what you think it might be, but it's closer to what will happen than what we knew 10 years ago and 20 years ago, because the models are getting better at describing what's going on.
Carol, thanks much. Keith, we oftentimes hear that since the advantages of good agronomy, attention to soil health, and all of the rest of it pays off, that it works, that there are good results. And yet, we don't have the neighbors picking up that practice. Why doesn't everybody do this? What do you see out there? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's definitely the case, Don. And sometimes it's not easy leaving folks' comfort zone. I think that we as humans kind of can get stuck in ruts and do the things the same way over and over again, and it gets to be a comfort for us. And so making changes can be difficult. I think Hallie talked about the steps in the process that she went through, and they went through on their farm to even consider making changes. And they can be challenging, both economically and mentally challenging, just because of the change. And so I think that's some of it. And it's tougher sometimes, because increased management requires increased attention to detail, and depending upon who's in and out of individuals' fields and running the farm, it makes more work. And sometimes it's difficult to say, all right, 2 + 2 equals 4. It sometimes doesn't add up until years later. And so I'd farmed for 20 years, 20 plus years, until we ran into a year like 2019, where we were challenged to get into the field. And we'd always wondered if some of the soil health practices that we'd had in place were beneficial and paying off. And when we could perform field operations, but our neighbors were unable to because of the soil structure that we had, it was really, something that, I hate feeling like I'm patting myself on the back, but it felt like, what we've been doing and what we've been working towards was worth it. And so we saw that clear evidence of that in a year like that. But, otherwise it's sometimes small changes or small things, but, it takes a lot of work, and it's not easy, and there's not an abundance of resources. And so, it's getting to be more plentiful, but, it's just tough because each farm is so unique.
Keith, thanks. Don Moody, to what extent can your various crop insurance products respond to the sorts of things that Keith is doing, both to create an incentive for more of it and not penalize him for what he's done and so forth? How does all of that work?
No, absolutely. And excuse me, and being the really bright boy I am, I forgot my last slide that had a couple resources on there, including one from Nancy. This cover crop thing's a huge thing. We did it in the Sandhills, Nebraska in the 90s so we could keep farming. And actually, we started it in the late 80s. It was just a way to survive. If you weren't a farmer, you weren't going to be able to farm if you didn't. So I've always been a huge advocate of that. Now there's policies in place that started out as pilots, and now they're covering most of the grain states, where if you are a steward of the land, there's a discount on your crop insurance. Crop insurance is designed to cover those disasters that affect you financially. Typically, there are some policies out there that are still production based. And there's pilots out there. Some are good and some are bad. There's a question that came across about, the volatility of prices. Margin protection came into vogue probably 15 years ago as a pilot from the RMA. Unfortunately, as it was initially written, it rewarded high producing farmers were just guaranteed extra income every year. And that's not the purpose of crop insurance. We have to remember that crop insurance premiums are subsidized heavily by the US government to keep food on the tables. If you boil it down to its very essence, that's what it's for. And so people walked away from margin protection because, if you will, in my humble opinion, it wasn't a scheme nor a scam, but it wasn't done to protect good farmers. Margin protection now has come back into vogue a wee bit, and it's designed for farmers to be able to take some of the volatility out of price fluctuations of their inputs. It's priced all wrong. And that's why early on I mentioned in my presentation, you have to pay attention to your budget. You have to address your risk, and you can do that a lot of different ways. There's been a lot of folks talk today. Hallie talked a little bit about how, she budgets in what she's doing. There's risk management. If you take it down to its essence again, she's minimizing risk so she can produce more on her farm to ensure its survivability. And I know I'm starting to ramble a wee bit now, but there are products there that can address risk volatility. There's programs that will be coming that will address it. And I'd also say if anyone has an idea or a thought of a policy that ought to be in place, and by policy, I mean insurance in this case, reach out to me. We actually have a team that develops those. They vet them to see if they're sustainable, if they make sense. Not all do. Some have merit. And then you go into the whole, Hallie's 9 steps. We might have to actually, she needs to trademark that for more than just developing her farm. It applies to so many things. We have to make sure that it's going to work. But again, I'll quit rambling, but there's programs out there that are available. Reach out to somebody that knows, and I'll shut up with one thing. Don't do your crop insurance nor some of the related ARC and PLC programs just because that's the way your neighbor's done it or the way you did it last year. We used to self-insure on our farm until 78. And we self-insured by how we geographically ranged our farms. We only took out hail. Well, the 3rd year we were completely wiped out because Mother Nature figured out where our fields were and managed to align the storm systems with them. We had to start participating in crop insurance, federal crop insurance, out of necessity. That's the only way we could survive after that because it removed our cash reserves. So what I'm saying is, be smart about it. Do your farm practices, work with somebody that understands what crop insurance can and will do, and always keep in mind what you can afford for your risk management. And I don't mean spend every last dime, just don't spend more than you ought to.
No, thanks much. Jeff, that first conversation you have with a person, how do you get that first conversation? You've got a neighbor who's under stress, and that neighbor is, like most of us, not really in a mood to talk to anybody else. How do you break through that? How do you get that first conversation going?
Well, first of all, you've got to ask the question. There's a thing that I do that I teach. It's called QPR, which is question, persuade, and refer. And it's like CPR for mental health. But the first thing you have to do is ask the question. Nobody's just going to come up and say to you, "Hey, I'm having a bad day. I want to talk about it." But if you, I said in my little time frame, I said about planting seeds. The minute that you question somebody and be blunt about it, hey, the way things are going, you look down more than you usually do. You don't seem as happy. Are you having thoughts of ending your life? Are you thinking about suicide? We can ask these questions because honestly, it's an easier conversation to have than the conversation with their loved ones if they end their lives and we didn't do anything about it at all. First of all, the second part of it is that you get to that persuade part where it's like, you're talking to your neighbor and they're kind of down in the dumps. You've asked them the question and they're just, they say something like, "I don't feel like I belong here anymore." And you say, "Well, you remember 5 years ago when you came over and you helped me weed my garden that day, even though you had stuff to do, but you came over and helped me, like that meant so much to me. And I think about that day often when I'm having a bad day," which persuades them that they have value. We can validate their bad day. We don't have to give them, positivity that's I'm trying to think of what the word is right now and I'm drawing a blank, but toxic positivity. We don't have to say, "Well, tomorrow's going to be better." We don't know that. I mean, that's what it's human nature, but that's what we do. "Oh, somebody's got it worse than you do," or, "Oh, come on now, how bad can it be?" That's crap. Let's keep that conversation going, saying, you know what, Hallie, I understand you're having a bad day and it's okay to have that bad day. And I'm here for you to talk. If you don't want to talk right now, that's fine, but please call me when you're ready to talk. Or if you just need me to listen, and validate that. Ask them what they want. Do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to interject? Do you want me to give you words of wisdom? Do you want me to, whatever the question is? And then the refer part of that is where we get them the professional help they need. Maybe they have maybe they like talking to their neighbor Don, and so they were, we go over and talk to their neighbor Don because they trust them, or like the younger generation, maybe they've got a favorite teacher or a coach that they like to talk to or whatever. But you're not going to get this conversation started unless you ask the question. That is the biggest part of this. It's the easiest thing to do. We talk about tough conversations in the agricultural community. We don't like to have that conversation with our banker about our finances when they're rough. We don't have to like having the conversation with the tractor salesman or the equipment salesman and that kind of stuff when times are tough. Well, we'll have those conversations. Those conversations will still happen. We need to make the conversation about mental health happen. Ask the question. It's that simple.
Jeff, thanks much. Holly, there's something that I call the white painted fence test. And that is, as I, drive around regions, if you see the farmsteads, with their fences painted and their barns, in good shape and so forth, you figure that they probably are also investing in other assets, the ground, the soil. And, farm profitability seems to me to be really a core to making things happen on the farm. All the sorts of things that Keith was talking about, the sorts of stuff that you're doing and so forth. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you're sort of bringing to mind this this old gin that we have on the farm that was built in like 1937 that we are desperately trying to repair and make look nice, so that when people come on our farm, they're like, oh, well, there's not this like crappy gin over here. I think that what is most important to us when we think about investments in our farm is cash flow. It is about what money needs to go where, when are our bills due, when are we getting paid for our crop, and then it's about prioritizing. And if it's about prioritizing the 7 wells that I need to get converted, or if it's about prioritizing a combine that I can't seem to ever get fixed, or if it's about prioritizing getting a building painted, it's probably going to start with the combine and then work its way down to the building. The building might be last. So I don't know if we're a very good example of people who necessarily keep their buildings looking nice, but invest in our crops and our farming practices.
Thank you, Hallie. How are we doing on time? Are we getting close to when we need to let folks go? Are we? Okay. Well, instead of starting another round of questions, which would be really fun to do, I think we do have to close off. I really want to thank each of our speakers, and I especially appreciate their efforts to condense their messages to the 8 to 10 minutes that we allotted them. That's a lot to ask of guests. They've been great guests, and I so much appreciate their contributions today. And I thank you, all the participants, for your engagement, for your questions, to push this a little deeper, sometimes a little wider. This is a first engagement, we hope, and we wish to continue to engage with commodity growers and some of the issues we've brought up today in the future. And on the screen, I think you see a couple of contacts there. So thank you much. And I will turn it back. Well, I guess I probably better just close it out. Is that correct? All right. Thank you so much.